Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here this week with Professor Kerri Froc from the University of New Brunswick Law School, and given the attention that's been placed on this probable decision coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court, I figured we'd talk a little bit about some of how this reverberates in Canada. I've spoken to Kerri before for some pieces I wrote, in particular about the situation around the abortion clinic in Fredericton. So I figured I would talk to her now about how this works or how this is working in Canada. So Kerri, nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A lot of nervous Canadians out there as a result of this US Supreme Court decision being leaked.
Yeah, so why don't we start with just kind of giving a bit of a distinction between what's different in Canada versus the US so that we got to get a sense of the, I guess, the ground, first of all.
Certainly. So, one of the big differences between the United States and Canada is structural. In the United States, the states have control, have jurisdiction over criminal law. In Canada, obviously, it's the Parliament, it's federal government.
Federal.
So, what happened is the state of the Union in Canada, as so to speak, is that in 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada, in the Morgentaler decision, struck down the criminal code provision on the basis that it violated women's right to liberty and security of the person. Liberty, obviously, was the decision of the only woman on the court, Madam Justice Wilson. The majority dealt with it on the basis of security of the person. Since that time, there was one attempt by Parliament to engage and develop a new criminal code provision that didn't pass the Senate. And since that time, there's been no governmental attempts to introduce a bill that would recriminalize abortion. So in Canada, abortion is regulated essentially as any other healthcare service, although governments have treated it differently. New Brunswick, for example, singles clinic abortions out for special, not so great treatment. But it really is a matter of professional ethics for doctors, hospital policy, and provincial government regulation. In the United States, of course, it is really a matter of state powers, although there's some discussion about whether Congress could pass a law guaranteeing a right to abortion federally.
Right. Okay. And trivia note was that it died on a tie vote in the Senate because that's what works in Canada. If it's a tie, it's defeated. So that's just a bit of trivia. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is the American Roe v. Wade is grounded in a right to privacy. And I wonder if you can kind of just sort that out for me a little bit in my head in terms of how that operates differently under law than in Canada.
Right. So this is going to be a little bit of insider baseball for constitutional law nerds. But there's a theory in the United States concerning penumbra rights. And those are rights that aren't specifically articulated in the U.S. Bill of Rights, and their interpretation is very textual, as you could see from the leaked decision. But they indicated that the right to privacy falls under the penumbra of liberty. Therefore, on that basis, in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court said that a woman's decision whether or not to terminate a pregnancy, it's basically one between her and her doctor. Now, in a subsequent case that modified Roe called Casey, which I think was in 1992, 1993, that decision was more squarely based on liberty and due process rights in terms of state governments not being allowed to put substantial barriers in front of women's decision. So that was the state of the law. It still is the state of the law until we get a formal decision overturning Roe issued by the U.S. Supreme Court. So in Canada, privacy was the subtext to a lot of Morgentaler, but the decision wasn't based on privacy. It was based on the fact that the Section 251, as it then was, of the Criminal Code, created this really labyrinthine process by which women could get approval to have an abortion through therapeutic abortion committees of 3 doctors in a hospital that had to be convinced that a woman's life or health were put in jeopardy by the pregnancy. And what the Supreme Court found is that this was a defense to the criminal code prohibition in name only. It was practically illusory because some hospitals didn't have therapeutic abortion committees. Some took an incredibly narrow view on what constituted a threat to a woman's life or health. Some took a more expansive view. So it was very arbitrary in a lot of the parts of the country. It was inaccessible. And in any rate, what happened is it creates delays. And I was reading up on a study today showing that since decriminalization, the abortion rate in Canada has remained steady, but there's been a big decrease in second trimester abortion. So what it showed is that it really was having an impact on causing a delay, which of course increases the risk of complications. It increases women's distress and stress. So those things were found to be a violation of their physical and psychological integrity. Now, Madam Justice Wilson based her decision on liberty, and she said that's a prior question. It's just not simply a matter of bad process. It's a question of whether the government can interfere with this fundamentally personal choice of whether to carry a pregnancy to term. Now, that was a concurring decision, but subsequent decisions of our court have made it very clear. Majorities have cited that with approval, so that's good law as well. So there's 2 bases. There wasn't a decision based on equality because equality law was still in its very embryonic stages in 1988.
Right, because the charter had only been 6 years old at that point.
Right, and Andrews was a 1989 decision, right? So didn't even have the benefit of Andrews at the time Morgentaler was decided.
Okay, and so we got to kind of get to the point where the real challenges are in Canada, which is around access. You've got the example in New Brunswick around, I think it's Clinic 554.
Yes.
In Fredericton, which the government refused to fund, and its status, every time I hear it's either open or it's closed, and I'm never quite sure which it is at the current moment.
Yeah.
But this was something that I know the federal government had tried to exert a little bit of pressure on. They clawed back some Canada Health transfers, and then subsequently refunded them when the pandemic hit because they didn't want to look like the bad guys there, rather than like they were. Yeah. Rather than like this feminist government was sticking to its principles. But tell me a little more about why this is kind of the issue that we should be focusing on in Canada, as opposed to the mechanisms in the US that people are kind of nervous about.
Yeah. So, criminalization is a huge lightning rod for people because it really means potentially putting women in jail. There was a case in Texas where a woman was actually charged and put on remand before someone shook their head and came to their senses and let her out. But it is really a matter of, it focuses people's attention for sure. But there's other ways to do indirectly what the Supreme Court in Canada said that you can't do directly, which is, put these terrible barriers in front. So what we have in New Brunswick is a regulation called 8420. That regulation says that we, as a government, will not fund abortions outside of hospitals. And so we had Clinic 554, which is actually now being in the process of being sold. Okay. So for a long time, like Clinic 554 shut down, oh goodness, probably a year and a half or 2 years ago, but Dr. Edgar was still coming in to serve patients for abortions just because access has been so bad. But that's going to come to an end if it hasn't already. So it literally, like, building is being sold, nothing's going on there. So the problem with that being is that Everett Chalmers Hospital in Fredericton has said that it won't perform abortions. Basically, the lore that I've heard is that they said that the building isn't equipped with a special area with proper security, and given, anti-choice protesters and whatnot, they simply can't do it. So it would be to the tune of, $1 million or more to properly set it up. The Horizon Healthcare was approached to kind of bring Clinic 554 into the fold and have it as part of the health network, and they refused that as well. So essentially, the only way you could get an abortion in Fredericton is going to Clinic 554, putting up $700 for that. And the issue that I've heard is, well, we have a cardiac specialty hospital in St. John. People have to travel for healthcare all the time. So what's the subtext is what's the big deal? Yeah. So to that, I would say is, if you have a heart attack, Chalmers will take you. If you need some sort of heart surgery where you're on a wait list, certainly, but abortion is a time-sensitive procedure, shall we say. As Morgenthaler showed us, the longer you wait, the more risky it is for women's health. Women are also a group that are marginalized on a number of different bases. Abortion is a stigmatized procedure, so you don't necessarily want to be asking a bunch of friends and family to drive you up to Moncton or Bathurst. Women, because they earn less money than men, it's more, they have to arrange for time off work and healthcare, and that has a disproportionate impact on them. They can't drive after. So like I say, they have to pay for a hotel room, potentially to stay in Moncton, or arrange for someone to drive them back. So there's a lot of gendered impacts on not having the service here. That isn't the case, for instance, for an MRI or heart surgery or anything like that.
Okay. And elsewhere in the country, I think the Globe and Mail this weekend posted a map which had kind of like range distances to clinics. And in some places, the drive is more than 6 hours. And then there's whole swaths of the country where there's nothing in the area either. So this is definitely something that we still struggle with in Canada.
Totally.
And it's something that the federal government has few levers at their disposal around as well, because delivery of healthcare is provincial responsibility. And if we're deciding that this is a health matter, then that's effectively cedes that control to provinces.
Yeah, so they like to say, but if you look at the funding lever, that's a huge lever. Like the federal government provides a huge chunk of funding for healthcare. They've chosen not to put any strings on that funding, as they are entitled to do, and courts have said they're entitled to do. So it would be, not that difficult for them to say, you're not getting this whole health transfer if you're not providing healthcare on an equitable basis, as between men and women. They also have the lever under the Canada Health Act. They've said that they want to put some more specific provisions in there in relation to accessibility and reproductive services. I don't think they need it. They just need to enforce what they have. I think it's a convenient political excuse to say, oh, well, there's ambiguity there. There's no ambiguity. If they want to do it, have at it. But I think, there's pros and cons to having more specificity. that kind of raises implications that they're conceding that it wasn't clear before, which I think is wrong. But there's lots of things that they can do other than, making a $140,000 drop in the bucket fine, which they then say, "Oh, just kidding, we're going to give it back now." And I mean, I'm kind of being facetious, but I think there was good reasons for them to do that. I mean, I live in New Brunswick. I only got a family doctor a few years ago. My husband still doesn't have one. There's major problems with the healthcare system here, and those kinds of problems and fines shouldn't be put on the backs of New Brunswickers that didn't ask for this. So I think the government should be taken to task, but it shouldn't be borne by New Brunswickers.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for walking us through this and giving us kind of a lay of the land and why the reasons we were nervous should be different than the ones in the US. So thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the biggest problem is potentially people in the United States, anti-choicers, being emboldened to, protest more, to make the lives of women seeking abortion more miserable. We saw with the convoy how influenced we are by American politics and culture. So I think that is the bigger threat than anything from this leaked decision kind of seeping into our law. I don't think that's the problem, but I think culturally there might be bigger problems ahead of us. So thank you for
putting a new
having
front
me.
in the culture war.
Indeed, unfortunately.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.